Forget garlic and sunlight. The true ancient weakness of the vampire is arithmetic. From the forests of Serbia to the crypts of China, the world's most terrifying monsters, the Vukodlak, the Jiangshi, and the Vitala, all suffer from the same paralyzing flaw. They must stop their bloody hunt and count every single grain of rice or poppy seed thrown in their path. Why? This obsession reveals the deep, fatal flaw in the monster's immortal mind.
Welcome to Shadows of Creation, where ancient legends, forgotten horrors, and supernatural wars are reborn. For those who crave the untold side of mythology, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and tap the bell below.
We have all been conditioned by Hollywood. When the monster appears, the defense is predictable. We reach for the cross, the silver bullet, the splash of holy water, or the wooden stake. But the deepest, oldest, most chilling lore of the blood drinkers holds a secret that is far more absurd, far stranger, and profoundly more terrifying than a fear of silver or sunlight. It is a paralyzing, inescapable addiction to arithmetic. Imagine the scene in excruciating, sustained detail. A towering ancient horror, an entity that has existed for centuries, propelled by cold, immortal malice, is finally cornered. The prey, frantic and out of options, doesn't produce a crucifix. Instead, they produce a simple sack of rice, or perhaps a handful of knots, or maybe just a pile of millet seeds. They cast it onto the floor, scattering the contents into a chaotic, mesmerizing mess. And the monster stops. Its ancient, unholy hunger, the driving force of its eternal curse, is overridden by an immediate, inescapable, and profound compulsion. It must stop, kneel, and count every single item, one by one, until the tedious, impossible task is complete. Why? Why does the creature who cheats time have such a crippling, obsessive vulnerability to calculation? Why does a blood drinker's rage submit to basic enumeration? This is not a regional oddity, it is a global pattern. This flaw is shared by monsters separated by continents and oceans. It is found in the deep forests of Eastern Europe, the misty rice paddies of Imperial China, and the ancient haunted crypts of India. They all suffer from the same bizarre, paralyzing flaw. We are talking about a mythic detail so fundamental that it transcends culture and language, suggesting a universal truth about the nature of evil. The conventional answers, superstition, coincidence, or simple peasant folklore, are woefully inadequate to explain this phenomenon. To sustain this long-form investigation, we must dive far deeper than simple fact collection. We must investigate the philosophy of the undead mind itself, a mind that is not truly immortal, but merely trapped. It is frozen at the moment of death, a relentless machine driven by its last, terrifying impulse. We are searching for the archetypal trap, the cultural and psychological mechanism that links calculation to chaos and spiritual order to the breaking of a monster's attention. Our journey begins by exploring the deep philosophy of the obsessive mind, setting the stage for the true horror of the counter-compulsion. Before we encounter the counting monster, we must first understand the state it represents: chaos. In nearly all world mythologies, creation is defined as the imposition of order onto an original, formless void. The undead monster, particularly the vampire, represents the reversal of this sacred process. The vampire is a body that should be decaying into simple matter, but is instead reanimated by an unnatural force, violating the fundamental contract of existence. It is a source of chaos. The philosopher Immanuel Kant spoke of the sublime, a feeling of awe mixed with profound terror when the human mind attempts to comprehend something vast, infinite, or overwhelming, like the cosmos or eternity. The monster is itself an overwhelming, eternal force, a terrifying realization of the sublime. The creature exists in a state of continuous, violent contradiction. It is dead, yet it lives. It is mortal, yet it is immortal. This contradictory state makes its behavior fundamentally erratic and dangerous, operating outside the predictable laws of God and nature. The monster's mind is not rational. It is defined by a singular, perpetual impulse. Whether that impulse is feeding, haunting, or possessing, it shuts down all other forms of consciousness. This is the curse of obsession. The undead cannot feel joy, true love, or spiritual transcendence. They can only feel need. Their existence is a relentless, repetitive cycle: rise, feed, return to the grave. The monster is essentially a broken algorithm. The peasant counter-defense, then, is a brilliant, powerful act of folk physics that weaponizes a smaller, mundane kind of terror, the terror of infinite, useless repetition. When the human hunter throws a handful of scattered seeds, they are creating a localized, chaotic field of triviality. The monster, trapped in its primary obsession, the hunt, cannot resist the secondary obsession presented by the scattered seeds. It is a mind that only recognizes patterns. When you scatter 1,000 objects, you present an irresistible, finite yet practically infinite problem. The counting becomes a spiritual black hole, replacing the terrifying pattern of the hunt with a new pattern of tedious numerical labor. It is forced to abandon its primary terrifying goal for a secondary goal that is utterly trivial and spiritually meaningless. This is the ultimate spiritual trap. It uses the monster's own rigidity against itself. We will now apply this psychological lens to 3 vastly different primal forms of the undead, starting with the creatures of relentless, unthinking hunger. Our search for the compulsory counter begins in the freezing, fear-soaked heartland of Eastern Europe, the region that gave the world the very word vampire. This creature, often called the Vukodlak, meaning wolf fur or wolf skin, connecting it to shape-shifting and other primal terrors, was not the elegant count of modern fiction. It was, historically, the misunderstood corpse, a terrifying primal revenant born of burial violation, disease panic, or simply dying without proper rites. The Slavic vampire was characterized by a primal, brutal simplicity. It was driven by a single, unthinking hunger for the vital force of its family and neighbors. It was a creature of the body, a decaying engine propelled by the lingering, malicious lower soul, the Po soul, trapped inside a stiffening corpse. This monster represented the profound fear of the grave's failure, the absolute terror that the dead could not stay dead. To understand its hunger, we must spend time on the Slavic concept of liminality. Liminal spaces, the edges of the forest, the moment between sunset and darkness, the boundary of the village fence, were the most dangerous. The vampire, being a creature between worlds, neither truly dead nor truly alive, was inherently drawn to these boundaries. It needed to cross the boundary of the grave, the boundary of the door, and the boundary between the sleeping and the waking world. It is against this mindless, cyclical hunger, this primal need to cross boundaries, that the counting weakness emerges with stark clarity. Villagers, desperate to slow or stop the Vukodlak's nocturnal hunt, utilized the tools of their agricultural and domestic lives. They would scatter a handful of millet seeds, flax seeds, or poppy seeds, or tie countless intricate knots into a fishing net, leaving the items outside the doorway or on the grave. The seeds are a literal spiritual roadblock. They interrupt the primary rhythm of the hunt and trap the unthinking malice of the vampire in an endless loop of pointless computation. The monster cannot proceed until the count is complete, and the count itself becomes a substitute for the consumption it truly craves. The act of counting the grains, which spill over the threshold of the door, forces the liminal monster to establish order at the very boundary it seeks to violate. It is forced to pause its destructive crossing and engage in a meticulous constructive task. The Slavic instance teaches us the first visceral principle of the counter-weakness. It is a defense against cyclical, unreasoning hunger. The monster is not calculating, it is being calculated upon. We turn now to the sophisticated, politically minded civilization of China, where the compulsive counter-weakness is integrated into a system of spiritual governance. The Jiangshi, the hopping corpse, is the key example. The Jiangshi, as we've established, is a creature of spiritual failure, its lower Po soul trapped by trauma, forcing it to rise in a grotesque, stiff state. Its hunt is driven by a need for qi, the vital life force. But the weakness against the Jiangshi is deeply tied to the philosophical and administrative structure of Taoism. Taoism, in its ancient and mystical form, views the universe as an immense, intricate celestial government. The gods, spirits, and demons operate within a complex hierarchy of laws, rules, and procedures, a vast spiritual bureaucracy. The Jiangshi is a product of chaos, a soul that has broken the ultimate law, the law of rest. But because its existence is governed by this celestial bureaucracy, it is also inherently vulnerable to the rules and procedures of that system. The Chinese counter-defense is specifically rice, or sometimes copper coins, thrown across a threshold. Why rice? Beyond its simple abundance, rice represents sustenance and order in Chinese society. It is the very material basis of civilization and the ritual offering to ancestors. When the Jiangshi, a creature of spiritual chaos, is confronted with a massive scattered pile of the material symbol of order, it is forced to engage in the most fundamental bureaucratic task of all: enumeration and accounting. The monster's trapped spirit is forced to confront the structure and law it violated. It must process the material order before it can proceed with its chaotic desire. This isn't just a distraction, it is a spiritual exploit. You are forcing a demonic bureaucracy to perform endless trivial paperwork, trapping the chaotic Po soul in a loop of tedious, mandatory compliance that it is incapable of abandoning. The monster, driven by its singular hunger for qi, is overloaded by numerical duty. This Chinese case teaches us the third bureaucratic principle. The counter-weakness is a defense against spiritual chaos through the enforcement of cosmic order. It uses the meticulousness of the celestial government as a weapon against the spirit who broke its laws. The evidence is now clear. The most terrifying monsters on Earth, the Slavic Vukodlak, the Chinese Jiangshi, the Indian Vetala, all suffer from the same baffling, paralyzing weakness. They are all trapped in a cycle. The monster is stuck in the cycle of hunt and burial, or the cycle of riddles and possession. The core nature of the monster is cyclical obsession, a soul that cannot transcend its immediate repetitive state. The act of counting is the human mind's most fundamental method of imposing linear order onto the chaos of the natural world. When we count, we are progressing. 1, 2, 3. It is a structured march forward. But the sheer volume of the objects, the scattered rice, the seeds, the knots, converts the linear act of counting into an impossible cyclical loop. The monster is pulled from its predatory cycle and dragged into a new cycle of triviality, a mental and spiritual black hole that consumes all its focus. This is the ultimate spiritual trap, taking a monster defined by its obsessive singular focus and forcing that focus onto a task that is utterly meaningless to its survival. The weakness is not a magical property of the seeds. The weakness is the monster's own rigid, repetitive mind. The global truth is that the deepest flaw of immortality is compulsion. The vampire is a creature of absolute necessity, and when you present it with an equal alternate necessity, you break its ability to function. The survival mechanism of the ancient world relied on the wisdom to find the trivial vulnerability, the psychological addiction, and the simple pattern that breaks the monster's eternal unholy obsession